You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
This is high-purity THC content marijuana, and it's not a healthy substance.
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja.
We love the herb.
It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Thursday, June 29th, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to get to the radical rant today because I woke up to find Kevin Sabet being de-pantsed by Tom Angel and my representative Earl Blumenauer all over Twitter for his failure to understand how basic congressional processes work. And then in response to it, he goes even further off the deep end into full-scale tinfoil hat mode. I'll tell you all about it in extended rant at the end of the show today. But coming up first, we got the cannabis headline news. We'll catch up on the latest stories in the marijuana movement. Then we have our Police for Reform segment, where former Deputy Sheriff Jay Fleming, who used to do undercover narcotics work and vice work, and then became a medical marijuana patient, we'll talk to him about what's going on in the state of Arizona as they fight their opiate epidemic down there like they are all across America. Then in Drug War Data Mining, we take a look at a new study that looks at your brain on alcohol versus your brain on weed. Then in Cultivator's Corner, we visit with our good friend Jorge Cervantes, who gives us an international report on the latest on cannabis cultivation legally in Mexico, Colombia, South America, and Spain. That's all coming up today on the Marijuana Agenda. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Putting together the most comprehensive live weekday marijuana news talk program is a full-time job. Now you can do your part to ensure that listener-supported independent cannabis radio journalism can continue by becoming a patron of the Marijuana Agenda. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button. For your $4.20 monthly donation, you'll receive over 20 hours of original first-hour podcasts, plus other materials only available to paid subscribers. Or for just $9.99 a month, become a VIP patron. You'll get over 40 hours of podcasts for the complete program, including Toker Talk Radio, plus ad-free downloads of the segments heard on the Marijuana Agenda. Plus, VIPs get exclusive access to the video replay of the 2-hour live stream show and downloads of the spreadsheets and charts I provide from my years of curating marijuana data sets. Thank you for your support, and remember, I cannot do it without you. Please become a patron today at mjagenda.com.
It's time for cannabis facts about teen drug use from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A recent survey by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control indicates that in states that have legalized medical marijuana, the rate of marijuana consumption among high school students has not increased. In fact, in legal states like Colorado, teen use has actually decreased significantly. It's simply no longer a big deal for teenagers in legal states. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
The Marijuana Agenda. Like the liberal agenda, but with profits. Ka-ching.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com. City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Thursday, June 29th, 2017. I'm Russ Belville. According to a report in the Denver Post, a Denver grand jury has indicted 62 people accused in a marijuana trafficking organization that reaped millions of dollars by illegally growing pot and then selling it out of state over a period of 4 years. It was the largest marijuana bust in Colorado since recreational marijuana was legalized in 2014, and it reflected an increased law enforcement focus on gray market marijuana growers who export their product beyond state lines. Andrew Friedman, a cannabis regulation consultant for states and cities, said he is hopeful that state legislation passed this year will make it more difficult for criminals to grow quantities of weed bound for the gray market while pretending to have a legal interest in the business. One of the bills would make it illegal to grow more than 12 plants in a residential neighborhood, even if the grower has approval given to some medical marijuana patients or caregivers to grow 99 plants or more. Marijuana Policy Project reports that Governor Chris Sununu signed an important bill into law that will expand the number of seriously ill patients who qualify for New Hampshire's medical cannabis program. House Bill 160 becomes effective on August 27th. It adds moderate to severe post-traumatic stress, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and moderate to severe pain as qualifying conditions for medical cannabis. Also, the law allows medical providers to certify patients for any medical condition that produces a qualifying symptom, and it requires the Department of Health and Human Services to inform patients about the possibility that certain rights and privileges may be denied by federal agencies. Lawmakers introduced a bill today that would use the power of the purse to reduce incarceration and crime at the same time. The legislation attempts to counter archaic tough-on-crime policies coming out of the Attorney General's office. The Reverse Mass Incarceration Act of 2017 was introduced by Senators Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, and Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut. The bill, based on a 2015 proposal by the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University School of Law, is widely backed by civil rights advocacy groups and supporters of criminal justice reform. The bill is essentially the reverse of the incentives provided in the 1994 crime bill. Instead of incentivizing states to increase prison populations, the legislation would pay states to decrease them while keeping down crime. Overall, it would lead to a 20% reduction in the national prison population over 10 years. New Approach Missouri, the group gathering signatures for a medical marijuana constitutional amendment in 2018, announced they've already gathered potentially 1/4 of the signatures they need to make the ballot. Quote, signature collection is steadily progressing with 40,000 signatures collected and with a plan to increase signature production with paid collectors later this summer, end quote, the group's legislative counsel, Jesse Kelly, said via press release. Kelly also announced that, quote, New Approach Missouri has been promised $200,000 in matching funds once the organization meets its own fundraising goal of $250,000. Kelly stated that the organization is, quote, well on their way with $185,000 to be banked by Friday, end quote. New Approach Missouri has until May 6, 2018 to submit signatures. Missouri's petitioning process is complicated by laws requiring signatures from at least 2/3 of the state's 8 congressional districts. If signatures were collected from the 6 smallest of the 8 districts, 160,199 would be required for a constitutional amendment. Advocates will shoot for tens of thousands more signatures than necessary to mitigate signatures lost to legal challenges and verification failures, a scenario that doomed Missouri's 2016 medical marijuana effort by just 23 signatures. Catalonia, Spain's parliament moved ahead on an issue that's dogged the legal marijuana states in America by approving a bill to regulate cannabis consumer clubs. The bill regulates cannabis consumer associations as well as the cultivation and transportation of marijuana by these clubs. It also establishes the general norms for the constitution of the organization and operation of these associations and their clubs, which until now were protected in municipal regulations. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Thursday, June 29th, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 2 weeks for Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine from the Burning Issues podcast on CannabisRadio.com. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
The Marijuana Agenda. Kevin Sabet's boogeyman since 2012.
You have offended my family, and you have offended Shaman Temple.
Yes, might have gotten away with it, too. If it wasn't for these blasted kids and their dogs.
At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
This is Police for Reform, brought to you by Law Enforcement Action Partnership at LEAP.cc. LEAP is a group of law enforcement professionals advocating for criminal justice reforms in the areas of drug prohibition, mass incarceration, asset forfeiture, community policing, and more. LEAP provides qualified speakers across the world to speak with authority on criminal justice issues. We visit with one such speaker now in Police for Reform.
Welcome to Police for Reform. I'm Russ Belville. Joining us on the program today, we have former Deputy Sheriff Jay Fleming, who worked with the Park County Sheriff's Office in Montana. He's currently speaking to us from Dolan Springs, Arizona. And how are you doing, Jay? Nice to speak to you.
Oh, doing pretty good. It's finally cooled off up here a little bit. We're down to about 100.
Oh, just 100. Well, that's good news, I suppose. Where is Dolan Springs exactly? And is this a little town, big town?
It's pretty little. It's about 2 blocks long, the actual town itself. We're about halfway between Las Vegas and Kingman, Arizona.
Okay. So, according to your bio, you got started up in Spokane, Washington in the 70s, and you were doing narcotics investigations, drug buys, and undercover work. Tell us about that, about your background fighting the drug war in the 70s and how that led you to the stance you take today with regard to the war on drugs.
Well, back in the 70s, the president was telling us that the war on drugs, was ruining the country and everything. And, some people go fight overseas, and I decided to fight the drug war here. But as time went on, I got to see that, we really weren't accomplishing anything. You arrest somebody, and all you do is make another job opening. By the time you get him in jail, there's somebody else on the corner, selling the same thing. And it just came round and round, and I saw that we were in this circle that was just never going to end. We had to try something different.
Yeah, we hear that so often from the law enforcement personnel we speak to on this segment. And in your case, there's kind of an intersection with the medical marijuana movement as well. It says that your career was cut short in 1984. Tell our listeners what happened.
I was off working part-time driving a truck, and I tried to unload a pallet full of car batteries by myself, which wasn't a good thing to do. I herniated a disc and ended up having back surgery. It left my legs with neuropathy, and I've lost a lot of muscle in my right hand and my right leg. I get a lot of back pain. So I've been on opiates for about 20 years, and I just started medical marijuana here a few years ago, and it helps with the neuropathy much better than what the opiates do.
Yeah, we've heard that report that for neuropathic pain, cannabis is an effective and oftentimes superior pain relief option. So for you there in small town Arizona, of course, there is a medical cannabis program in the state. There was an attempt to legalize in 2016. And in 2016, one of the leading opponents of legalization was an Arizona-based company called Insys Therapeutics that manufactures an opioid-based medication and now is manufacturing a synthetic cannabis type medication. What's it like to know that this is going on and to see your fellow Arizonans still kind of behind the curve when it comes to the reform of these laws?
Well, yeah, that company put a lot of money into to try and defeat our legalization effort here. And what's happened, I think, now with Nevada and California, where I live on Highway 93 between Vegas and Kingman, where it meets I-40. I-40 comes out of California. I'm just afraid we're seeing a lot more unmarked cars here, and as with the legalization in those states, I think we're going to really have a lot of enforcement here on these two roads, picking people, left and right, and using our asset forfeiture and just racking up points, getting the people who purchase legal marijuana in California and Nevada, and then try and make it home here to Arizona or on east.
And with respect to asset forfeiture, what are the state's policies? I know some of the states recently have passed laws that require criminal convictions. How bad is it there in Arizona?
Arizona hasn't gone that way yet, I don't think. We still see cars on the side of the road here all the time with 3 or 4 unmarked and a marked unit with somebody's poor car torn all apart. And I think that's just going to ramp up with, starting the 1st of July here, especially coming out of Nevada there.
That's right. This Saturday, 1st of July, is the beginning of adult recreational sales from what may be up to 40 outlets, mostly in Las Vegas. And, of course, you'd be right there on that road of everyone coming back. What are the prospects in Arizona as far as moving forward with legalization? Is anyone looking at 2018, or is it more likely 2020 would be the next shot?
I don't know. They're kind of confused here. There's two groups that kind of fight each other over this, and that's one of the problems here.
Oh, no.
I don't know quite what we're going to do. We need to do something. We need to get this legalized and stop locking these people up. I mean, really.
Yeah, and from your experience, you found it to be, a wasteful and unproductive failure. The war on drugs is but one aspect of law enforcement reform that Law Enforcement Action Partnership is working on. What are some of the other aspects of law enforcement reform you think this country really needs to start employing?
Well, the racial divide. We hit the black communities much harder than we hit the white. And it just seems, I don't know, we go into these communities and we're not helping anybody. We arrest these people, they go in the cycle, they get into the prison system, and once you come out, they try and revoke you for anything. I mean, pot stays in your system 30 days. You stop by, smoke a joint with somebody, they violate you, and you're back in prison, serving hard time again over really nothing. And we've got to stop that revolving door and try and get some training. It used to be in the prisons where you went to prison, you'd be trained, you'd come out with a trade. Today, we simply warehouse them in these overcrowded places where all they do is learn to be better criminals and better drug dealers, I think.
And trying to fight for these reforms in Arizona, of course, up until recently, was infamously the home to Sheriff Joe Arpaio. I understand he didn't get reelected this last term, but what's it like trying to convince conservative and oftentimes older Arizonans the wisdom of this stance?
I think most of them got it this last time, and there was some advertising in our last legalization thing that really wasn't the truth. And I think that's what pushed it over and got us to fail this last time. There was just so much money against this that it's difficult to fight. When I go out and talk to the older Arizonans here in the Kiwanis clubs and things, once you explain things to them, it's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. but there's so much hype and, about the opiate thing now. It's an opiate crisis. It seems like most of it is heroin and the illegal fentanyl, but the people who are taking the brunt of this are the pain patients. A lot of doctors are cutting pain patients' doses in half. Like I've been on opiates for 20 years. When you reduce the dosage too much, the patient has two choices. I mean, you either turn to the street or you turn to a gun. I mean, living with chronic pain is hell. And when these doctors, for no medical justification, cut doses, I think our suicide rates are really going to jump this year.
This is one of the aspects of the opiate overdose epidemic that we need to pay attention to, is not wanting to restrict legitimate pain patients from the medications they need. I think sometimes there's a tendency to want to demonize fentanyl. Oh my God, it's 50 times more powerful than morphine or whatever. Hey, some people need 50 times more powerful than morphine, right?
Yeah, and it comes in micrograms is how it's dosed. I mean, you don't get a lot of it. It comes in patches usually. I don't think I've ever seen it in pill form. And most of that coming into the States now is illegal. Most of the pain patients are good people. They use it. But when DEA comes in and arrests a doctor, the problem is, 20 days later you go to get a prescription refilled and there's a sign on the door saying, DEA arrested him. And that's the first time the patient ever really knows. So you've got, 1,000 patients for some doctor scrambling, trying to get to other doctors, and nobody wants to take them because this was a bad doctor, but they certainly weren't all bad patients.
Yeah, it is a shame. So Jay Fleming with Law Enforcement Action Partnership, he's one of many, many speakers all across the United States and around the world who can appear at your Kiwanis Club, your Lions Club, your Rotary Club, any of these events that might be going on, and speak with the experience and wisdom of having fought on the front lines of the war on drugs. Jay, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. And is there any other contact information or websites you'd like to tell people about?
Yeah, just come to lawenforcementactionpartnership.org. Look at our Speakers Bureau, find somebody who'd like to come talk to you, and let us come explain the other side of the drug war and the other side of what law enforcement can do for you. We need to build trust back in our law enforcement.
Completely agreed. Thanks for being with us here on Police for Reform.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
It's time for cannabis facts about Alzheimer's from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A new Florida study in the journal Molecular and Cellular Neuroscience found that cannabis promotes the growth of healthy new brain tissue. It can slow the effects of Alzheimer's and may in fact be able to halt it entirely. A long-term study by Ohio State University's Professor Gary Wenk concludes that people who regularly use marijuana get Alzheimer's at a much lower rate than others. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
The Marijuana Agenda, like the gay agenda, only with better music.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Putting together the most comprehensive live weekday marijuana news talk program is a full-time job. Now you can do your part to ensure that listener-supported independent cannabis radio journalism can continue by becoming a patron of the Marijuana Agenda. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button. If you're an organization or business looking to promote your brand, we have sponsorship patronage available at mjagenda.com. Sponsorship includes 15 and 30-second ad breaks and 6-minute interviews on the podcast, depending on sponsorship level, which begins at $19.99 a month. Thank you for your support, and remember, I cannot do it without you. Please become a patron today at mjagenda.com.
Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Today in the Data Mines, we take a look at a study that is being reported in the journal Addiction. It's a research report entitled Structural Neuroimaging Correlates of Alcohol and Cannabis Use in Adolescents and Adults. So to translate that from researcher speak, you could say, we did some MRIs of the brains of teenagers and adults to see what alcohol or cannabis would do to their brains. That's basically what this study is doing. And they begin by noting that chronic alcohol use is associated with lower gray matter volume in the brain, and that alcohol use showed negative associations with widespread gray matter volume, even among young adults. So they wanted to check out alcohol use versus gray matter volume, alcohol use versus white matter integrity, cannabis use versus gray matter volume, and cannabis use versus white matter integrity among adults and adolescents, so adults and kids. And so they set this up with all the proper controls. They had adults aged 18 to 55 for your adults, had 853 of them. And for adolescents aged 14 to 18, they had 439 of them, with a wide range of alcohol and cannabis use. And they base this on past 30-day use of cannabis. And so what they found is great degree of negative associations between gray matter volume and alcohol use among adults. The more they used alcohol, the less gray matter their brains had. And to a lesser extent, among adolescents, less gray matter, the more alcohol they used. There's also significant associations of higher alcohol use with poorer white matter integrity among adults, but there was no correlation between adolescents and their white matter integrity, whether or not they used alcohol. There were no associations observed between gray matter, volume, or white matter integrity in the past 30-day cannabis use in adolescents or adults. Let's restate that. No associations between cannabis use and any deficit in the structures of the brain with respect to white matter integrity, gray matter volume. Now, what does this gray matter volume mean anyway? What are we talking about if someone doesn't have a good degree of gray matter volume? Well, according to a study, Science Daily reported on this one. It was called Lack of Gray Matter in Brain is Linked to Schizophrenia and Bipolar Disorder. A new study shows that adolescents experiencing a first outbreak of psychosis have lower levels of gray matter in their brains than healthy teenagers. Strangely, this change was seen in patients suffering from various psychoses, including bipolar illness and schizophrenia. So all these years, we've had to listen to the marijuana prohibitionists tell us that marijuana couldn't be legalized because, oh my God, we got to worry about the teenagers. We got to worry about the schizophrenia. We got to worry about the psychosis that cannabis could cause. And what we're really finding out is when it comes to reducing gray matter in the brain, alcohol is the culprit. And we're finding that lack of gray matter in the brain, or a reduction in gray matter in the brain, is linked to schizophrenia and bipolar. It could be the alcohol that is making the confounding situation here. It could be the alcohol that is leading to these psychoses or these schizophrenia diagnoses or these bipolar diagnoses that our prohibitionist opponents so desperately want to tie to cannabis. And since so many people who consume cannabis also consume alcohol, it's hard to tease out which is causing the problem there when they purposefully want to confuse the issue. But these two studies taken together show us that we have far more to fear when it comes to our brains from overdoing it with alcohol than any amount of cannabis we could use.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association and the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit MJBA.net for more details.
This November, whether you see the words medical marijuana on your ballot or not, the issue is there. From the halls of Congress to your state capitol or city hall, politicians are already making decisions on medical marijuana policy on your behalf. This election, make sure they are representing you. Every vote is a vote for medical marijuana.
Visit votemedicalmarijuana.org today.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
I was told by the DART task force in Toledo that they're actually sprinkling fentanyl on marijuana now.
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for our Government at Work, the latest in cannabis reform at the local, state, federal, and international level. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Welcome to Cultivator's Corner, brought to you by MarijuanaGrowing.com. Today, we visit with legendary cannabis cultivator Jorge Cervantes to learn the tips, tricks, and techniques to master your marijuana garden. Email your cannabis cultivation questions for Jorge to grow at mjagenda.com. He may answer them on a future episode. Now let's get growing in our Cultivator's Corner.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Cultivator's Corner with our good friend Jorge Cervantes, who's on the line with us. How you doing, Jorge?
Really good, Russ. It's a beautiful day here in Northern California. Thanks for having me on the program.
Yeah, glad to have you here. And I hear that you're moving northward from Northern California. Tell our listeners about that.
Oh, yeah. I'm just in the process of selling my home in Sonoma, California, and I'll move to Washington State, where I've been running my business for many years. And I'll spend some time there, but I'm looking forward to spending a good deal more time in Spain because I'm only there half time, about 6 months of the year now. And I also look forward to a lot of traveling because even though there's tons of stuff going on here in America, there's even more things going on in South America and also in Africa. And then Spain as well, lots of stuff.
Yeah, we know about your work in Barcelona. We always see your pictures coming across social media from Spanibus, and we've been aware of your activities there in Spain for quite a while. But I'm kind of interested in these other continents. I mean, cannabis is spreading everywhere. I have some friends in South Africa, actually, the Dhaka couple who are fighting for cannabis rights down there. Tell us what you know about what's happening in South Africa.
Oh man, they've legalized. Just the government has. It hasn't come to a vote by the like from a plebiscite or from a referendum. It's come right through regular channels of the government. And the government there is pretty amazing because they actually pay attention to science, and science rather than weird personal politics dominate everything. So they've made it legal to cultivate and possess and consume cannabis at home and it looks like they're going to go all the way and legalize it. And two, that South Africa is surrounds a small country called Swaziland, and that's where Swazi comes from. It's like a kind of a cannabis country all the way. Yeah, so that's really, really pretty cool. In fact, this winter, I think I'm going to go down there and spend about a month. Be a good time. And the weather will be better in December or January than it is in Spain.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, of course, we also got the news just this week that the president of Mexico, Enrique Peña Nieto, has signed a medical cannabis law there. How was your travels to Mexico and the progress in cultivation there?
Well, it's pretty amazing. A few years ago, I was down there, and I went to, quite a few big mafia farms, and they were huge. It was pretty interesting. But and I also went to university in Mexico, in Puebla. But what I've seen is a big change because, well, first off, with legalization, there's the law that changed for human rights. Everybody has the human right to grow cannabis. There was one case that came up, and they just need two to four more. It's not set. 2 more cases to go through and arrive to the Supreme Court. And once they win those cases, which it looks like they will, cannabis will be completely legal in Mexico. But right now, Peña Nieto has signed a bill to legalize medicinal cannabis. And just last week, I was hanging out with my good friend Julio Zunil, that he's the editor of Cáñamo Mexico, which is, cáñamo means him in Spanish. Anyway, he's got, what is his third annual fair, third or fourth Expo Cannabis Mexico happening next year again. And I just talked to him yesterday on the phone, as a matter of fact, and he said that, 7,000 people attended the last fair. So, and then I talked to several other old Mexican friends, and man, they're really excited. And the most interesting thing there is los narcos, or the mafia. They call them narcotraficantes. Anyway, those guys are pretty much going to be players in it. And then two, I don't know if you realize it or not, but Vicente Fox Quechada, he was the president of Mexico from 2000 to 2006. He also wrote the intro to my last book, Cannabis Encyclopedia. He said, and I believe him because, man, this guy is right on. He said he's going to start growing cannabis as soon as it's legal. But when he starts growing it, he's got thousands of acres of farmland. He's one of the biggest farmers in northern Mexico. So I look for a lot of things to be changing in Mexico. It's so cool. I mean, because when I was there, it was rough times.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, we've read a lot of reports about how legalization is changing things in Mexico for the peasant farmers who are working for the cartels, saying they used to get $100 a kilo for cannabis. Now it's below 25 a kilo, and
right.
There's some concern that that's leading them then to switch to other crops like opium, or some of the cartels are increasing their production of methamphetamine. That's the only worry I have about that issue.
Well, that's all true. The amapola, they call it amapola, the poppy, the opium poppy. And in fact, I know a guy there, his name's Don Amapola. It's like Don Poppy. Yeah, he's pretty heavyweight. And I was a hard guy to hang out around. But
I'll bet.
Yeah, that's all true. That's all true. And it's all about money and money. That's what's going on. The mafia is still out of control there. There's approximately 300 murders a day still in Mexico. And one of the things that Vicente Fox said in the intro to my book was he just wants to stop the killing and the funerals. You know, it's sad. It's sick stuff. And I'm looking forward to the end of this drug war. And then talking about that, there's also, I was, 3 years ago now, I was in Medellin, Colombia, and because that's when the legalization thing just started there. Well, now, gosh, it's amazing what's going on there. I think I may go there this winter too. I'm not certain on that trip, but I very well could because I've got an incredible amount of friends there. The Indians in Cauca is where the province where they have Cali. Cali, it's the biggest city in the south on the coast. And they grew more than 50 metric tons of cannabis there last year. And it looks like they're going to increase that somewhere between 5 and 10-fold this year. So it's that part's technically illegal, but it seems to be tolerated. There's only three cannabis licenses there in Colombia. So they're funneling them through those licenses. And I talked to my friend Henry that has the fair in Medellin, and it's going to be, next year will be the third annual. I didn't go to the first two. I think very well could go to the third one because it's really growing now. I've been invited there many times. But he said it's really amazing. But the cool thing, this is so cool about Cauca and the Indians there. Because, there's always a big movement between the Indians and international business ventures that are already there in Colombia trying to take over the cannabis business. The Indians that suffered so badly during the FARC, the revolutionary group, that was broken, last year by, first it started with Uribe, and then the new president actually got a Nobel Prize for breaking the FARC and disbanding them. Well, they controlled the entire cannabis business in Cauca. And now, the Indians have taken over, and they have just basically the FARC is gone, and the Indians are in charge now. And what they've done is they've taken over the entire system. The FARC had a tax system for the cannabis, and the Indians took over, and they use the same tax system so they can support themselves, and they have a lot of they've got money to play politics now. So it's really changed a lot. I'm really amazed by Colombia. And yes, too, you can grow 20 plants legally there at home. And they're also looking to legalize completely cannabis, but they're trying to control it. So that's super cool.
It's amazing to hear what's going on in these countries south of the border, Mexico and Colombia, that we have typically thought of those as narco states. I've just recently watching the History Channel's War on Drugs documentary specials, which are fantastic. I recommend them to anyone. And the most recent one was talking about the Medellin and the Cali cartels there in Colombia and the rise of cocaine. Is there any hope that the rise of legalizing cannabis in Mexico or Colombia or any of these places is going to help ameliorate some of those problems with the opiate substances or the cocaine substances?
Well, maybe not. One of the things that comes up is that opium's still really a strong cash crop. And, that's a problem, So as long as they can get a good price for their cannabis and they're not exploited, they're going to choose to grow one rather than the other. This news never gets up to America about the coca plants and also the amapola, what do you call those, the amapola again? Opiate poppies. What happens is they use this incredibly strong glyphosate Roundup that's not available in the United States. And the United States government goes down there and sprays that stuff. It completely destroys watersheds. Lots of people are getting cancer. None of that's reported. It kills all kinds of wildlife, anything that's susceptible, frogs, fish, everything. It's really been devastating. So that's going to continue to be a problem, and it's just got to be, I believe it could be solved on an economic basis.
Wow. Very interesting stuff. Jorge Cervantes, we appreciate your expertise and traveling around the world and bringing this information to us. Let's make sure people know about the marijuanagrowing.com site so that they can get the information on cultivating cannabis for themselves.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, actually, marijuanagrowing.com is my website. I've got a Facebook site. All you have to do is type in Jorge Cervantes into the internet, and you can find tons of stuff out about me. You can find my site, my my Facebook, all of my social media sites. Everything's on the first page or two. I mean,
excellent.
It's real easy.
we appreciate that, Jorge, and good luck on your travels. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much, Russ. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for having me on the program.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
Your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
Hi, I'm Keith Stropp. I'm a 72-year-old lawyer, and I first smoked marijuana in 1965 when I was a freshman at Georgetown Law School, and I've been a regular smoker ever since. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults, and it should be of no interest or concern to the government whether we smoke or why we smoke. When we founded NORML in 1970, only 12% of the American people supported legalizing marijuana. Today, roughly 60% of the American people support full legalization of marijuana. They've come to understand that marijuana prohibition causes far more harm than the use of marijuana itself. It's time we ended marijuana prohibition and stopped treating marijuana smokers like criminals. If you agree, please visit our website at normal.org and sign up for our free newsletter. We are only incidentally talking about marijuana. We are really talking about personal freedom.
The Marijuana Agenda, like the alcohol agenda. But a lot safer.
I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for the UK Cannabis Chronicle from the UK Cannabis Social Clubs. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I inhaled.
That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
People don't smoke marijuana.
Radical Rant.
Today in the Radical Rant, we take a look at the latest shenanigans by the Joker to my Batman, Kevin Sabet, the leading prohibitionist in the nation, the CEO of Project SAM, the so-called smart approaches to marijuana. He's been getting a little uppity lately. He thinks that he's done some major accomplishments in 2017 in that nobody's legalized marijuana yet this year. He's been crowing about wins in Connecticut, and Maryland, and Rhode Island, and Vermont. And what it really is that we haven't legalized there yet. So Vermont's going to legalize next year for sure. The rest of these are coming around as well. So Kevin Sabet is crowing about something that has merely been slightly delayed. And it's important to note that none of our reforms have been repealed. So he's not made any progress at all. He may have slowed some of our progress a little, But that's really more on the politics involved and the legislatures involved than it has anything to do with what Kevin Sabet is up to. But this is the garden variety stuff you expect from a prohibitionist. You expect them to try to spin and try to make things seem better than they are. But usually Kevin Sabet doesn't do such a sloppy job with his spin that the entire internet can own him for the rest of the day. And that happened yesterday when Kevin Sabet and Project Sam put out a tweet and a press release regarding the new appropriations bill, the new funding bill that is being put before the U.S. Congress. And in the press release, he says, quote, "A proposed government spending bill released today eliminated a provision that has protected the marijuana industry from federal prosecution for violating the Controlled Substances Act." In his tweets, he said, quote, "Breaking. Congress strips provision barring DOJ from spending money to enforce pot laws. This is a big change. This is, of course, far from over, but pot investors have to be freaking out. It is indeed a new day." End quote. So what he's talking about here is the spending amendment to the rider, this rider to the spending bill called Rohrabacher-Farr, which is now called Rohrabacher-Blumenauer. It's the amendment to the spending bill that says Department of Justice and its DEA can't spend any money going after the legal medical marijuana states. It's been enacted every year starting in fiscal year 2015, and it's currently enacted through fiscal year 2017, which ends on September 30th. So what Sabet's excited about is that there's a new draft in the subcommittee for the fiscal year 2018 Justice Department Appropriations Bill, the next appropriation. And he's saying, aha, they stripped out Rohrabacher-Farr. They removed it from the spending rider. But here's what's going on. It's never been part of the original bill. It wasn't part of the original bill in 2014, in 2015, in 2016, in 2017. The original bill never says the Department of Justice can't spend the money. It's an amendment. That's why it's called an amendment. It's something that is added later to the original bill. Congress didn't strip out anything. It was never there to be stripped out. It's something that gets added in the amendment process. And so Drug Policy Alliance tweeted out, the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment is never in the base bill, so it hasn't been stripped. Nobody is worried. You're congressionally clueless, Kevin. A new day? Actually, it's the same day as the last 3 years when it's been won on the floor in committee and made it to the final bill. And my congressman, Earl Blumenauer, tweeted, Sam clearly doesn't understand legislative process. Sam's complete misrepresentation of the legislative process is entirely consistent with their repeated falsehoods about marijuana, end quote. So Kevin Sabet gets called on this, and then he doubles down. He doubles down trying to say that the amendment was initially passed in 2015, even though it was passed in 2014. And then he tries to point out that it was omitted from the he fails to point out it was omitted in 2015, 16, and 17, the way he's saying it's omitted in 2018. So he's desperately trying to cover his ass on messing this up. And in doing so, went as far to have a second press release in response to Representative Blumenauer, my congressman, saying that that Congressman Blumenauer and Congressman Rohrabacher, Dana Rohrabacher of California, who's the co-sponsor of this amendment, the two of them who pass this amendment every year, said that they are, quote, funded by illegal marijuana operations selling pot candies to kids. That is despicable. Nobody in the legal marijuana world is selling pot candies to kids. It's the illegal sellers that do that, the ones that don't check ID. And to show you how completely tinfoil hat Kevin Sabet has gotten since he's lost year after year after year after year, and the Gallup poll since he has started Project Sam has risen 12 points from 80%, 48% to 60% national support. We've quadrupled the number of legal states since he got started. He's so batty over this that he then went forth after getting caught and chastised by Representative Blumenauer, said, quote, and this is in the Project Sam's official Twitter account, not Kevin Sabet's Twitter account, said, quote, yes, they back it because Tom Angel, representing Big Pot, who funds these two, Rohrabacher and Blumenauer, probably wrote it. More in the morning. Oh, so now my colleague Tom Angel from Marijuana Moment and writer for Massroots has another gig, apparently. Apparently now he's writing press releases for congressmen. Congratulations, Tom, on your new gig. What's this? Oh, I'm sorry. Follow-up tweet from Tom Angel. Quote, I'm flattered our opponents think I write press statements for members of Congress, but no. Oh, it's gotta suck being a marijuana prohibitionist these days, with 60% of America supporting us, with 3 out of 5 Americans living in a jurisdiction with some form of legalized marijuana. We'll talk more about this in hour 2. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.
Name something that gets passed around.
A joint.
A joint.
Now, streaming live on the Marijuana Agenda.
Oh, really? What are you people? On dope?
It's time for Toker Talk Radio.
Hey, this is great, man.
The voice of the Marijuana Nation.
Marijuana is listed as a Schedule 1 drug. That is absurd.
Call in now at 650-LEGAL-MJ. That's 650-534-2565.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
Hey, man. Am I driving okay?
Toker Talk Radio is your chance to make your voice heard in the Marijuana Nation.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
Send that message with clarity that good people don't smoke marijuana.
Now let's get to Toking and Talking with your host, Russ Belville.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Glad to have you here. It's time for Toker Talk Radio, and my God, did Kevin Sabet step in at this time, trying to brag about the Rohrabacher Farr Amendment having not yet been added to the appropriations bill. He's trying to say it's gotten stripped from the appropriations bill. No, it just has not yet been added. It's amazing the straws that he is trying to grasp at in his attempt to remain, relevant and have any sort of sway over what people think about marijuana these days. There's so much that he has been trying to pump these days, faced with loss after loss after loss after loss. The guy, in the time since Project Sam has been formed, like January 2013, there's been dozens, I think it's like 32 now, 32 national polls that have shown majority support for marijuana legalization. And only one, I believe, that saw plurality opposition. So the guy's like 32 or 31-1, something like that, over the past 3-4 years. Or 1-31, we should say. He's 1-1 and lost 31. If your college football team's quarterback was 1-31 after 4 seasons, I don't think he'd go very far in the draft. There's so much he's trying to say here. For example, on June 22nd, he tweeted out, today, big marijuana lost their bank account and Vermont of all places. What was that about? Inevitable? And what he meant by the bank account part was that MPP lost PNC Bank as their banker. That wasn't anything that Kevin Sabet did. That wasn't anything that was the United States or the people of the United States thinking marijuana was a bad thing. That's just the election of Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions making a bunch of scary statements about cracking down on marijuana. That's all that is. And Vermont, we haven't lost Vermont. I love that he's trying to brag that he somehow lost, that he somehow had this massive victory by forestalling legalization in Vermont. Everybody knows Vermont's going to be legal next year. The House has passed a bill. The Senate passed a bill. The two of them reconciled their bill. The governor agreed with the reconciliation of the bill. The only thing they couldn't pull off is getting the Republicans to agree to vote on that during the 2-day short session. That's it. And then they just said, look, we can't do it this short session. We're dealing with the budget. We'll take care of this in January. So legalization's a done deal for Vermont, Kevin Sabet. It's just been put off for a little bit. So crow about that all you like, because I'll be glad to retweet those tweets after Vermont becomes legal in January. He also crowed about this piece in The Hill, saying it was a big win in Vermont. And he puts up a scoreboard where he says legalization wins in 2017, 0. Losses, Vermont, Connecticut, Maryland, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Delaware, and Rhode Island soon. Well, here's the thing, Kevin. Vermont's not a loss. It's going into overtime, and we're going to win that one. Connecticut, Maryland are not losses. Maryland, I believe, just recently passed a bill expanding its medical cannabis law. New Hampshire just did that, expanded its medical cannabis law and established a better decriminalization law. New Mexico, I believe, has expanded its law. Delaware and Rhode Island. Rhode Island's going to pass legalization. They've currently passed a study committee bill, and they'll probably get around to legalizing in the next session. And don't forget, we got medical marijuana in West Virginia and Indiana. Nobody was expecting West Virginia, and Indiana was doubtful as well. So he's not even winning by his own standards here. It's pretty sad what it's come down to for poor Kevin Sabet, the Chicken Little, who the boy who cried wolf, the boy who cried stoners. So I thought, Kevin Sabet, given that he didn't understand what the amendment process was all about when we're talking about bills in Congress, I thought maybe he could use just a little bit of help understanding how that all works. So when we come back from break, we got a special video for Kevin. So maybe he can get some education. And we'll also talk a little bit more about what's going on in the wide world of marijuana. But before we get to that, we'll have that toward the end of the show. When we come back, we got a special bonus radical rant about some dog-killing cops in Detroit. I'm not going to be happy about this one.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Putting together the most comprehensive live weekday marijuana news talk program is a full-time job. Now you can do your part to ensure that listener-supported independent cannabis radio journalism can continue by becoming a patron of the Marijuana Agenda. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button. For your $4.20 monthly donation, you'll receive over 20 hours of original first-hour podcasts, plus other materials only available to paid subscribers. Or for just $9.99 a month, become a VIP patron. You'll get over 40 hours of podcasts for the complete program, including Toker Talk Radio, plus ad-free downloads of the segments heard on the Marijuana Agenda. Plus, VIPs get exclusive access to the video replay of the 2-hour live stream show and downloads of the spreadsheets and charts I provide from my years of curating marijuana data sets. Thank you for your support, and remember, I cannot do it without you. Please become a patron today at mjagenda.com.
It's time for cannabis facts about teen drug use from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A recent survey by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control indicates that in states that have legalized medical marijuana, the rate of marijuana consumption among high school students has not increased. In fact, in legal states like Colorado, teen use has actually decreased significantly. It's simply no longer a big deal for teenagers in legal states. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
It's not recreational. It can be destructive, and it consistently is destructive.
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for the Celebrity Marijuana Zone with Steve Bloom from celebstoner.com. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I inhaled. That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
People don't smoke marijuana.
Radical Rant.
CJ Ciaramella has an amazing story up at reason.com. I encourage you all to check it out, and I will post the link in our chat room, and you should share this far and wide. It's called Detroit Police Sued Again for Shooting Dogs During a Marijuana Raid. 2 Detroit residents filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Detroit Police Department Wednesday, alleging that several police officers needlessly and maliciously shot their 3 dogs during a marijuana raid. Kenneth Savage and Ashley Franklin say that on July 22nd, 2016, Detroit police raided their house and found the dogs in a backyard bounded by an 8-foot-tall fence. The officers refused to let Savage and Franklin retrieve the dogs and instead shot them. The reason? Officers found several potted marijuana plants in the backyard Savage and Franklin contend were there legally. Remember, Michigan's a medical marijuana state, folks. The suit is now the 3rd active civil rights action against the Detroit Police Department for killing dogs during marijuana raids. A Reason investigation last year found that the Detroit Police Department's Major Violators Unit, which conducts hundreds of drug raids a year in the city, had a nasty habit of leaving dead dogs in its wake. One officer had killed 69 dogs over the course of his career, public records obtained by Reason showed. According to a search warrant affidavit, a Detroit police officer, while investigating an unrelated matter, observed several marijuana plants outdoors at the home of Savage, Franklin, and their son. 2 days later, 8 Detroit police officers arrived at the house. Police were aware Savage and Franklin had a permit to grow medical marijuana, but the plants were in violation because they were visible outside, the search warrant affidavit said. So these cops knew these people were medical marijuana patients. They knew these people had a right to cultivate cannabis. But for a technical violation of being able to see plants in their backyard behind an 8-foot fence, these cops decided they needed to raid these people. They needed to break down their doors. They needed to violate their privacy and most egregiously terrorize these people by killing their dogs. Here's where the story gets obscene. When Franklin showed police her marijuana paperwork and demanded to see a search warrant, an officer responded, quote, "If you keep asking for a warrant, we are going to kill these dogs and call Child Protective Services to pick up your kid." End quote. That is a Detroit police officer threatening someone, making a terroristic threat of death and separation of family for daring to assert her Fourth Amendment rights. Officers detained Franklin and searched the house, but could not get to the marijuana plants because of the dogs. They initially called animal control, but decided to destroy the animals, the lawsuit says. They even had animal control on the way to get the dogs out of the way for the cops to deal with the horrific, heinous, indescribable crime of growing medical marijuana plants behind an 8-foot fence in the backyard. Officers shot and killed one dog through the fence, broke into the backyard enclosure, and fatally shot the other 2. Animal control arrived 10 minutes later. Now, was there a fear that these marijuana plants were going to up and run away if we didn't get there right away, back there right away and get a hold of them plants, kill them dogs right now? Those plants might just disappear. No, of course not. This was just some cruel, despicable bastards who think of marijuana users as less than human and delight in terrorizing and torturing us emotionally, physically, financially, legally. The lawsuit says, quote, "At no time did City of Detroit police officers give plaintiffs an opportunity to sequester the dogs to permit them to access the backyard where the subject marijuana was located. Plaintiff Franklin offered to take the marijuana from the backyard and give it to the police, but defendant police officers refused," end quote. Because the dogs presented no imminent threat to officers and were secured behind a fence, the lawsuit contends their killing violated Savage and Franklin's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. They are seeking compensatory and punitive damages as well as attorney fees for what they say are the Detroit Police Department's reckless actions and callous indifference to their rights. The Reason story continues. Last year, the city of Detroit approved a $100,000 settlement to a man after police shot his dog while it was securely chained to a fence. Michigan attorney Chris Olson, representing Savage and Franklin, is also representing Nikita Smith, who is suing the Detroit Police Department for shooting her 3 dogs while executing a search warrant for suspected marijuana sales. A judge dismissed criminal charges against Smith when officers failed to appear at her court hearing. So her marijuana sales were such a terrible crime that those dogs had to be killed. But not such a terrible crime that the cops had to take some time off during the day and go to court to actually prove she had committed the crime of selling weed. The Detroit Police Department did not immediately respond to a request by Reason for comment. However, in an interview this March with a local news channel, Detroit Police Assistant Chief James White defended the department from charges that it is needlessly shooting dogs, saying, quote, "This isn't Fluffy the family pet in many instances. Door comes off the hinges. There's pandemonium. People are running. Perpetrator, in many instances, has a weapon himself, can start shooting. Sometimes the dog is used as a tactic to get the advantage over the officers, and I just don't think it would be acceptable to an officer to put their life at risk to try to stop a dog from attacking during a drug raid," end quote. These people were medical marijuana patients. You knew they were medical marijuana patients. They were growing plants in the backyard behind a fence. You had no evidence or probable cause to believe they were massive drug dealers, they were selling, they were diverting, nothing. All you had was a technical violation of being able to visibly see the plants in their private backyard. As Reason writes, quote, "No officers' lives were at risk. Franklin had already been detained and animal control was already on its way. If a jury agrees with those facts, the city of Detroit might face another costly settlement." Now, I have a couple of other issues with this. Number one, it's not the cops that get punished for this. It's the taxpayers of the city of Detroit. It's the city that ends up paying that $100,000 out, not the cops. cops ought to be personally liable in these cases of excessive and needless cruelty. Bankrupt them. Take their cars, take their houses, do to them what they use asset forfeiture to do to us. Take their stuff. Doesn't bring the dog back, but at least it serves some measure of justice. And the other angle on this that's disturbing, in this case, we talked about the city of Detroit, giving out a $100,000 settlement, right? But there was another case I was reading about recently out of Anne Arundel County, Maryland, I want to say. I think it's Maryland, where people got a $1.26 million settlement for the vicious killing of their dogs by law enforcement. And again, that's a settlement that doesn't come out of the cop's pocket, comes out of the city's pocket. People end up having to pay for that, not the cop. But what was, and if it was the cop that was paying, and hell, I'm all for a $1.26 million settlement. That's fine, whatever. The number is great if the cop's paying for it. But what's disturbing about the city having to pay that, or the county, I guess it is in Maryland, $1.26 million, is that the family of Michael Brown, who was killed by law enforcement officers, their settlement was $1.5 million. So if the settlement for a dog is $1.26 million, don't you think a human life ought to be more than 19% greater than that? I mean, yeah, it's great to hear Black Lives Matter, but they ought to matter a little more than someone's family dog. Ask me. This is really just domestic terrorism, folks. It's domestic terrorism.
We're on a mission from God.
All right, folks, that sound means the time is 4:20 here in the Pacific time zone. Maybe I don't need a safety meeting. I might have already caught up. We'll be right back with some pleading news for the Seattle Hemp Fest. And, of course, at the end of the show, a special video for our friend Kevin Sabet. Stick around.
If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
Georgia. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
We need to say, as Nancy Reagan said, just say no. Don't do it. There's no excuse for this.
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 2 weeks for the Marijuana Policy Insider with Marijuana Policy Project. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Tjena, jag heter David, a.k.a. Dirtball. Vi ska röka hela tiden, alla år.
It's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation. Call in now at 650-LEGAL-MJ.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a great safety meeting. So, sad news coming out of the Pacific Northwest here, although it's not sad yet, but it's scary. And that is the future of the Seattle Hemp Fest. You know, Seattle Hemp Fest has been going on for 26 years now. And every year it's always a financial struggle to keep it afloat. But this year, it's really starting to stick. They're really having to kick down, cut a couple of the stages out, reduce some of their expenses. And the folks at Seattle Hemp Fest, Viv McPeak and all the great volunteers there, are dedicated to putting this on. It'll be on this year. And again, it's third weekend of August every year. But it's going to be a somewhat reduced Seattle Hemp Fest, and that's sad to see. I always tell people that as a dedicated marijuana activist, you should plan a visit to Seattle Hemp Fest, at least one of them. You should do this like Muslims make a pilgrimage to Mecca, right? Like NFL fans want to go see a Super Bowl, right? This is your big event. There's nothing bigger than the Seattle Hemp Fest. And I'm not talking about bigger of just pot events. Seattle Hemp Fest is the longest continually occurring largest political protest in the world. They draw anywhere from 100,000 to 150,000 people a day in that park. It's 1.6 miles of park that they've got cordoned off for a free speech event. All these stages throughout and great bands playing and speakers talking. And, full disclosure, I've been speaking at the Seattle Hemp Fest since 2006, I think. 2006 or 7. This might be my 11th, 12th year that I've been going up there to speak. It is something that completely changes your worldview when you're there, especially if you come from a very prohibition state. Like I came from Idaho and went to the Seattle Hemp Fest just as a visitor in 2004 and was just stunned to be surrounded by tens of thousands of my fellow tokers openly smoking weed, openly selling pipes and all the T-shirts and accoutrement you could want for marijuana. Well, you better get to it because who knows if Seattle Hemp Fest is going to continue. And it's kind of there's a strange sort of, karma going on here as well. Of course, Washington State has legal marijuana, but Hemp Fest didn't help that happen directly. Now, HempFest did have a lot to do with changing people's minds, changing people's attitudes, getting I-75 passed, which was the original Seattle lowest law enforcement priority for cops, bust everybody else and then you can bust the stoners. That happened in Seattle way back in the 90s. And sure, yeah, of course, Seattle HempFest helped to contribute to that, helped to contribute to the medical marijuana initiative getting passed, helped to change people's minds, change people's attitudes. But when the rubber met the road, when push came to shove, when it was time to support the first legitimate shot at marijuana legalization in Washington State, Seattle HempFest was neutral. Seattle HempFest stood on the sidelines. Seattle HempFest was about a 50-50 split among its core organizers as to whether or not to support the ending of arresting people for possessing weed and allowing there to be legalized sales of weed. They were neutral. I was there at that Seattle Hemp Fest in 2012, and it was a completely different vibe than every other Hemp Fest. Every other Hemp Fest is love and caring and sharing and hippy-dippy ethos. But that 2012, there were the red T-shirted no on I-502 people and the speakers who were vehemently decrying 502 and saying terrible things about its organizers and questioning their motives and decrying 502 as the worst thing ever for marijuana. So now marijuana is legal. And there are people, and I'm not among them, but there are people who see Seattle Hemp Fest suffering, losing some of its money, not getting as much donations as it need. And there are some people that say, hey, instant karma is going to get you, baby. You didn't stand up when it was important. You didn't stand up and vocally before legalization. You somewhat enabled our opponents by being the biggest, highest profile marijuana event in the world, remaining neutral on legalization. And I know people will say, well, you know, neutral, that might have been the best shot. Politically speaking, you couldn't piss off one side or the other. But I disagree. I think in times of legalization, in times of political tests like that, you've got to pick a side. You got to be for it or against it, because neutrality in that context might as well be opposition. It's like saying you're neutral on the issue of whether creationism or evolution is true. No, there's no neutral. There's no, well, both sides have a good point. There is evolution, which is true and scientifically verifiable, and then there's creation, which is myth and religion. And if you're one of those that say, well, we need to hear both sides, you're helping their side because their side doesn't have a leg to stand on. The same thing goes when it comes to marijuana legalization and trying to remain neutral on it. There is no neutral on legalization. You're either helping to stop people from being harassed, arrested, and imprisoned over marijuana, or you're helping to maintain the status quo. Neutrality helps the status quo. Now, I am not one to see Seattle Hemp Fest end, and I'm not one that is blaming karma or saying there's any dessert, that it's just desserts for Seattle Hemp Fest. I don't think that at all, because again, it was like a 50-50 split. The other half were strongly for I-502. I don't want to see Seattle Hemp Fest die. And it's sad because so many people attend this thing and they can't charge admission for it because it's a free speech event. And if it's a free speech event, you can't charge admission. If they did charge admission, then it's a commercial event. And then the city, which has for years tried to deny them a permit, has a better shot at doing that. Because a free speech event, you deny the permit, you're curbing speech. But a commercial event, you deny the permit, it's not the same thing. You got more of a leg to stand on when you're the opposition in that case. So they can't charge admission, but they do have donation boxes at the entrance of Seattle Hemp Fest and at all the stages, and people wandering around calling for donations. And if they just got $1 off of every person that attends Seattle Hemp Fest, we wouldn't have this discussion every year. But they'd be flush with cash. But as it is, they end up getting, 40 cents, 46 cents per attendee on average? As Vivian McPeak says, I don't care how bad the economy is, people can afford $5 for the weekend. Especially with the way prices are so low in Washington State, you can save a lot of money on your weed and put that toward your HempFest donation. But this is a story has been written in thestranger.com. It's by Lester Black. It's entitled HempFest is Fighting for Its Future. And in the story, he alludes to these people that have the issue with HempFest neutrality. He says, quote, "The public, of course, disagreed with McPeak and decided that I-502 was the right way to legalize weed. A friend who attended that year's festival told me he remembers the rampant anti-I-502 messaging being off-putting. Nevertheless, even if HempFest didn't fully support the legislation that ultimately legalized weed in our state, their work for more than 26 years establishing the groundwork and context for legalization deserves to be recognized." Exactly. So we'll see. I'll be there at the Seattle Hemp Fest. I'll have all of the my speaking times. I'll make sure we post that on the website. They are cutting down on a few of the stages. And there is suggestion that the upcoming, future Seattle Hemp Fest could be much smaller. Let's let this continue. Let's donate to this. Let's get out there to Seattle Hemp Fest. And remember that this gathering is still important. They still don't have home grow rights in Washington State. They still lock people up for growing a houseplant. That's got to end. And that was part of why a lot of the people didn't initially endorse I-502 in the first place as well. It didn't legalize home grow. And they also had a complaint with the per se DUID, 5 nanogram per se DUID. That's completely unscientific, unjust, illogical. cruel. It was indeed a flawed legalization plan, no doubt about it. But no flaw stands out greater than the enormous, life-wrecking, country-destroying, police-corrupting, drug-ruining flaw that is prohibition. You just can't, they're not even close. When your choice is end prohibition imperfectly or keep prohibition, you choose end prohibition imperfectly. And that's why Seattle Hemp Fest needs to continue. We still have to fight for that home grow right. We still have to fight to get impairment as the sole determinant of whether you're impaired, not some magic number on a chart. We still need to fight for the right of you and me and everyone in Washington State who legally consumes cannabis to be able to still go to work, to still have a job, to not lose everything, your job, your home, your freedom, your stuff, simply because you're a cannabis consumer. And of course, Washington State, we still need a place to toke. Washington State's the only state of all of the legalized states so far that has felonized cannabis clubs. They're going in the opposite direction as everyone else. Everyone else is kind of like slowly moving toward it. How can we make it happen? Washington State went and felonized it. What sort of mindset imagines that a room full of marijuana smokers enjoying each other's company is felonious, is something on par with kidnapping and robbery and assault and murder and rape? How does that even fit in felony land? It's insane. So please, if you can make a donation, even if you can't make it to Seattle Hemp Fest, make a donation to Seattle Hemp Fest. You can find them at hempfest.org. They could use all the help you can send them. We owe them a lot. We owe, if anything, do it for Vivian McPeak. We're going to take a break. We'll give you more from the wide world of weed when we return. And at the end of the show, we got a special video for our friend Kevin Sabet.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
This November, whether you see the words medical marijuana on your ballot or not, the issue is there. From the halls of Congress to your state capitol or city hall, politicians are already making decisions on medical marijuana policy on your behalf. This election, make sure they are representing you. Every vote is a vote for medical marijuana.
Visit votemedicalmarijuana.org today.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
We've turned the corner on drug addiction in the United States. Drug addiction in the United States is under control.
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 2 weeks for Police for Reform with Law Enforcement Action Partnership. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
I have a package here for Radical Rick. Is there a Radical Rick here? How about a Rick Russ? Any Rick Russ? Somebody named Freddie Barack has sent him a package. Anybody? What is that? Sounds like a skunk. It's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation. Call in now at 650-LEGAL-MJ.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Glad to have you here. All sorts of interesting things going on in the world of marijuana, and we encourage you to check out marijuanamoment.net. That's where I get my morning newsletter from Tom Angel, the founder of Marijuana Majority. And it's just amazing how much is in this newsletter. Everything you could possibly want to know, bringing back Ed McMahon, everything you'd want to know is in this newsletter. Boy, I'm dating myself with the reference, but kids, Ed McMahon was a talk show sidekick. Anyway, there's a new report out from the, missing the spot. There it is. Okay. Let me get to this study instead. I'm not getting the information I was looking for. A Georgia State University study says that marijuana use can lead to metabolic syndrome. This is the School of Public Health at Georgia State. Says the longer a person uses marijuana, the more the risk increases for developing conditions linked to heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. The duration of marijuana use seems to be a significant factor for metabolic syndrome, which increases risk for heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. Every year increase in marijuana use is associated with at least a 5% increase in the odds of having metabolic syndrome. Aha! A 5% increase every year. Well, let's see. I've been smoking marijuana since 1990. It's currently 2017, so that's 27 years. 5% each year, carry the 2, multiply. Yeah, I should be dead, right? I should be dead by now, I guess. I don't know what the original risk is and what raising it 5% compounded every year over 27 years results in. But yeah, I guess I should be dead. According to the report, it noted the most common form of marijuana consumption is smoking, but the original survey also asked participants who consumed edible marijuana products and hashish. While criteria for diagnosing metabolic syndrome are not settled, there are 4 commonly accepted signs of the disease: high blood pressure, high blood sugar, high concentrations of fat in the blood, and excess abdominal fat. Or in other words, being a middle-aged dude. I don't know, man. This is a pretty specious little study here. So many correlates involved that they're not factoring out. But it does bring up something I want to address. We talk a lot about these studies. And I've been recently in the news, adding into the news some of the negative studies where they say it increases this risk or increases that risk or causes this or causes that. Oftentimes it's so we can bring it up with Dr. Mitch and talk about it and debunk it. But I've got another agenda with this, with talking about the harms that researchers are presenting about marijuana. And that agenda is for us to not jump to the defensive when it comes to marijuana legalization. I worry sometimes that we may overextend ourselves when we are proselytizing for marijuana legalization with, it's safer than alcohol and it'll reduce opioid deaths and it'll raise all this tax money and all the things that we say, which are generally true. But in the event that there's some cases where it's not true, we open up the door for our opponents to say, aha, see? Those marijuana people lied. Those marijuana people exaggerated. Those marijuana people sold you a bill of goods. It was a bait and switch. We open ourselves up to this rhetorical risk of having defended and promoted our marijuana legalization based on some sort of objective gain. And when the measurement can be taken and that objective gain is either not reached or there's an actual loss, which again, I'm not saying is happening, but could. If we set ourselves up with that as our justification, then if we get bad news, it hurts our cause for legalization. And I bring this up because I worry, and I want to counsel people that are activists and advocates for this issue, not to put all your eggs in that basket. Don't put all your eggs in the tax basket or the reduced opiate deaths basket or any of these things. Because really they're they're secondary and irrelevant. The issue here is, should we maintain the status quo of punishing adults for using and cultivating cannabis? And the answer is no, regardless of what effect not doing that has. We should end adult marijuana prohibition simply because it's wrong to lock people up and punish them over a houseplant, a non-toxic healing herb. And not only is it wrong, the government has no authority to do so. Now, I know the Supreme Court has said so under the Commerce Clause and some Wickard v. Filburn stuff from the 1940s having to do with wheat. But these are flawed Supreme Court decisions on par with Dred Scott. These are terrible Supreme Court decisions. Justice Clarence Thomas, who, believe me, I don't enjoy being on the same side with, but he got it right in his dissent in 2003 when he dissented from the Supreme Court's majority that said the Commerce Clause gave them the right, gave Congress the right, gave law enforcement the right to curtail someone growing and using marijuana intra-state. This was the case of Angel Rach, a California woman growing California marijuana from California seeds in California soil using California buckets and California shovels and California gloves on her California hands to smoke California weed into her California lungs. There wasn't a single interstate involved. No inter at all intra-state. And the Supreme Court said, well, yeah, we know that she's medical. She's not commercial. And we know that she's in-state, not intrastate. And we know she's not engaged in any sort of commerce. However, theoretically, she could. She could take some of her medical marijuana and sell it in Wyoming. And there's no way to tell medical marijuana from recreational marijuana. There's no way to tell California marijuana from Wyoming marijuana. It's all fungible. You can't tell one from the other. So because it's theoretically possible that it could affect interstate commerce, even though that effect would be one woman with brain cancer selling an ounce here or there, and the effect on interstate commerce would be so minuscule as to be virtually undetectable, because it's all theoretically possible, the Commerce Clause allows the federal government to stop people from growing weed. And Justice Thomas dissented from that and said, look, if we rule that way, and I'm paraphrasing here, if we rule that way, then the Commerce Clause covers everything. The Commerce Clause could be used by the government to justify intrusion into any sphere of public use, cultivation, sales, growth of anything. But unfortunately, that's the way the Supreme Court decided. I believe that's a flawed decision. And I believe it's flawed for reasons that rarely get mentioned. I believe there is a personal privacy right, a personal cultivation right within our Constitution already. When the gay rights crusaders fought for same-sex marriage, their lawyers told them, we didn't need to pass a new law. We didn't need to repeal any laws. The Constitution already grants you the right, already recognizes the right of same-sex couples to marry. And that's the same situation right now. Our Constitution currently recognizes our right to cultivate cannabis and use it for our own personal purposes. And there's a number of ways it does. Number one, in our Declaration of Independence, it says that our whole country was founded on the bedrock principles of protecting our inalienable rights. No government can give them or take them. They come to us from our Creator, whatever you perceive that to be. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Among these, there's a shit ton of them, but here's three: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Among these. Now, I know the Declaration of Independence doesn't carry legal weight. It can't be used, as legal justification or precedent. But then we move on to our Constitution. To our Constitution, which was enacted to protect those inalienable rights again, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And they further cemented that by writing the 9th Amendment, which a lot of people don't pay attention to. But the 9th Amendment says, the enumeration in this Constitution of certain rights is not meant to deny or disparage others retained by the people. It's a real short one. It's like the 2nd Amendment. You can memorize the whole thing. And to translate that from colonial times, what that amendment means is, hey, we wrote down a bunch of rights: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom, right to a speedy trial, right against cruel and unusual punishment, right to bear arms, no unreasonable search and seizures, can't incriminate yourself. We wrote down a bunch of rights, but that's not all your rights. Just because we wrote a bunch of them down, that's not a limiting list. The 9th Amendment basically says that the list of rights in the Constitution is not an exclusive list. There are other rights we have that the Constitution didn't list. Now, before you think this is just some legal theory, some whack legal theory by some stoner, which I am, but still, understand this theory has already been proven. This is the reason why we have the right to use birth control, while no state can ban us from using birth control. It's why women have the right to abortion. Because in a series of decisions that included Griswold v. Connecticut and Roe v. Wade, the justices on the Supreme Court determined that there were these unenumerated rights that weren't listed in the Constitution, and that there was a penumbra of rights, kind of an umbrella that covered our privacy rights, things like our right to freedom of speech, right to religion, Third Amendment to not have soldiers quartered in our homes, Fourth Amendment not to have unreasonable searches and seizures, and that these, and the 9th Amendment too, was cited in Griswold case, and there's 13th and 14th Amendment considerations, but all these amendments taken together basically show us that the founders understood we had a basic right to privacy. Well, if the 9th Amendment and the rest of that penumbra of rights allows a woman to do with her uterus what she so chooses, and any man or woman to control their own reproductive system, then by God, that's got to give us the same right to be able to cultivate the same flowers that our forefathers cultivated.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association and the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details.
Federal prosecutors have been ordered to pursue the toughest possible sentences for criminal suspects. U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions issued a memo May 10th rolling back Obama-era reforms that eased sentencing for some nonviolent drug offenders. Anthony Papa is the manager of media and artist relations for the Drug Policy Alliance. Papa says Sessions' reinstatement of harsher sentencing policies will destroy families because the breadwinners will be locked up for extensive periods of time.
Not only is it going to put people with drug problems away that should be treated medically, not punitively, he's going to affect many family members of those that are being incarcerated.
The National Association of Assistant United States Attorneys says the policy will, quote, restore the tools that Congress intended to punish drug suspects. For United News International, I'm Neela Uni.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for Cannabis Sports Medicine from the Gridiron Cannabis Coalition. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
relation to North Dakota, you know, because they've got a town called Argusville. Arr. What are you smoking there, boy?
It's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation. Call in now at 650-LEGAL-MJ.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Glad to have you here as we wind up our show this past couple hours on the marijuana agenda. With a reminder, you can get the Cannabis Headline News podcast absolutely free. Check out news.mjagenda.com. That's news.mjagenda.com. All right, earlier on in the show, we talked about how Kevin Sabet called out victory for the most recent appropriations bill that's been for the Department of Justice. This is their budget. The draft bill has been submitted to the subcommittee, and Kevin Sabet crowed because the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment wasn't in it. Well, it's an amendment. It can't be put into the bill until after the bill has been submitted. Kevin Sabet got schooled on this, but apparently not schooled enough. So we decided here at the Marijuana Agenda that we would help Kevin with a little bit of education from our childhood.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Boy, you can't beat those old Schoolhouse Rock videos, man. There's nothing like that for kids today, is there? It's just a damn shame that it's so much that we picked up in the late 70s as there was kind of this revival in education at the elementary level, at the middle school level. And there was this reinvestment in civics. We had Schoolhouse Rock. We had all sorts of bicentennial celebrations. And you know, I just think kids aren't taught that these days. They don't get any instruction in civics. And it's sad because there's so much I think that our public schools should instruct people on that is totally lacking, right? And of course I support, the kids got to have math, kids got to have English and all of that. But do they really need to go as far as calculus in high school when they're not being taught how to fill out a tax return, not taught how to run a checkbook, not taught what is the process of submitting laws and bills, how do elections work, what are your constitutional rights? Certainly we can sacrifice some credit somewhere in the graduation requirements and teach these kids how their government works. And I think when we don't have that, we foster this disdain for government. I can't tell you how many people I have to deal with, and I'm sure there's a few in the chat room that have the attitude that government is hopeless. It's hopelessly corrupt. There's nothing we can do. Anytime someone tells me that voting is useless and it doesn't matter and it's all under the control of the elite and it's hopeless, I light a joint of legal weed and say, tell me more. Tell me more about how voting doesn't change anything while I'm smoking this weed for which voting is keeping me out of jail. Yes, it is corrupt. There's a lot of corruption. Yes, money speaks too much. Yes, but compared to almost the rest of the world, we got it pretty good in how much control the people have over our politics. It's that we've been taught to think we have no control. It's that we haven't been taught how to run the levers of our democracy, how to control precincts, how to deal with campaigns and elections. And that's by design, folks. That's by design. I could talk about this some more, but that's all the time we got. Time flies when you legalize. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other,
Follow
tokers.
MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it,